Now, if you remember one of our earlier stories that we ever read, I think our first story by Borges we ever read was that Garden of Forking Paths, and that had a little bit of a detective element. It seems that he kind of, I don't know, he seems to kind of dabble with this detective murder mystery genre, but at the same time deconstruct it too, if that makes sense.
Yeah, he took Poe. This is what I imagined. Borges had a bender of a weekend and read a ton of Poe and Doyle and said, I can do this in my own flavor. And this is what we get. And I love it. It's so mirror image is how I would describe it. And it's genius.
I like that you bring up Edgar Allan Poe because he hits it with on the head right away, right? We have the Rabbi Yermolinsky is murdered, and we're following Detective Longrow kind of through this. He compares it to like the Auguste Dupin from Edgar Allan Poe, right? Like the first detective ever, kind of solidifying, I guess, the genre. And if we look at it, the Edgar Allan Poe, like when we look at like Murders in the Rue Morgue, remember it was kind of like this theme of possibility versus probability. And I won't give away what the plot is of that story, but it's like, just because it's improbable doesn't mean it's impossible, right? Like you have to consider these things. But it trained the genre almost for years, like even to today, to almost have all these like red herrings, like the stuff that they tell you is almost what you ignore, right? You're looking at all the unsaid things and those hidden clues. It's training readers to try to come up with this really romanticized narrative about the real reason behind things, right? And here's the point of this story, which is deconstructing that, saying, no, the most obvious thing is something that you should be paying attention to.
See, I go lowbrow humor. This story, and this is not meant to be an insult because I love this type of comedy and this movie specifically. This is the Edgar Allan Poe, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Naked Gun detective. Remember the Naked Gun movies with Leslie Nielsen? This is that version. This is a parody of those great detectives. That's the Screwball, and I love it. This hits it home for me. This hits me in the heart because I love that slapstick kind of comedy, and it's just like this guy that thinks he's the know-it-all, and he's just screwing up left and right, and it's brilliant. It's so good.
Yeah. Well, I think it's humans love to detect patterns. You know what I mean? Like when there's like this, what appears to be a design, we like to find out what's the agency behind it, right? Like that agency detection of someone put this here on purpose. Like they're leaving me a secret clue. And it's kind of interesting to think, like, why is that? Like, does that give us comfort? Right? We've talked before about existentialism actually here tonight, where we've said that it could be quite terrifying to identify, like you're in charge of your own happiness and defining a purpose if existentialism is true, right? So the idea of giving yourself comfort, a psychological advantage of knowing why something is there, is kind of an interesting thing. But then how often are you creating agency where there isn't any?
I think that leads me to two thoughts. One, we relate better to people that we can sympathize and empathize with. When you're reading a story, watching a movie, whatever, and they screw up, you're like, yeah, I would totally do that. Where you look at these others and you see Sherlock or, these great detectives or these, super smart or capable people, they're infallible. And they're almost boring. And that was like one of the issues, like people have a problem with Superman and they love Batman, is because Batman's just a dude. It's more relatable. You could see yourself almost in that position. And I think that Borges has done a perfect job of having an average person being able to relate to the detective who's making the mistakes along this journey.
Yeah. And I think Borges gives it to you on a silver platter with the quote, "You will reply that reality has not the slightest obligation to be interesting. I will reply in turn that reality may get along without that obligation, but hypothesis may not." Right? And that's what I kind of love about this relationship between him and that other detective. Because if you remember, Borges made sure to point out that that other detective was an atheist, right? And he's not looking for agency or design behind everything the way that someone that is, highly religious believes there's like a designer and a purpose behind the universe, right? It's not to say one's right or one's wrong, I think, but the theory of the atheist being like, look, guys, it's right here. This was obviously a mistake, right? And even if you jump ahead to that third murder, he's like, this is a sham. This is a simulacrum, or however you pronounce that word. Clearly, this was like set up because it's just, following the pattern of, what was it, December 3rd, January 3rd, February 3rd. And, probably the second guy was just, caught up in something. And that's exactly like the truth that came out, right? Like sometimes the obvious answer is to jump back to Edgar Allan Poe, the purloined letter, right? Sometimes the answer is right there in front of you. And it takes someone who's aware and observant to pay attention and absorb that and not get caught up in that hypothesis that is romanticized in something quote unquote interesting.
Because everything has almost like a double interpretation, right? And I know that in the early days of the internet, I was on message boards sometimes, talking about TV shows like Heroes or Lost, or, trying to predict the next Harry Dresden book of where it would go. We as you pointed out earlier, we like those patterns, but we also like to see if we can figure out the puzzle. And I think that Borges here has given us a puzzle that's almost unsolvable, because there is no puzzle, because he's taking the idea of those other great authors and saying, what if we flip this on their head? What if we give you a mirror image of this that isn't what your expectation is? And it's almost like that's become the norm for a lot of TV shows and movies and things today, is they have that cliffhanger slash, gotcha moment, or, what's that? The director that always has the, oh my gosh, I got you. You weren't expecting that. Who is that? What's his name?
Alfred Hitchcock?
No, he's modern. Shyamalan.
M. Night Shyamalan.
Yes. Everybody wants to be like that, and I feel like he's giving you something that is simple, and there can be beauty in simplicity.
Now, all right, so here's a fun thought. Does Borges put all of those red herrings in here so that on your first read, you're kind of going through that experience yourself, right? Like as a fictional reader, you're sitting here saying, okay, first guy died just outside the exit to the hallway. Second guy died in the doorway to this paint place or whatever. And it isn't until like the final scene with Red Scarlac or whatever where they enter through the gate. And you're like, oh, what do doors have to do with this? What do pathways have to do with this? Because a lot of times, like if you're taking it just on a fictional level, doorways represent, openings to knowledge, openings to new beginnings, essentially, right? And like, that's not just fiction, I guess, right? That's a little unfair because if you remember, I think I've told you before how I've been on like this tour of Frank Lloyd Wright. He's like this American architecture wizard who's designed some of the most beautiful houses. And the tour guide was telling us how he specifically designed like the hallways and doorways to be kind of like constricting, to be kind of small, which you wouldn't think for someone who's designing really fancy mansions and such. But he wanted you that when you opened up and entered into this space, like going through the doorway, he wanted you to feel relief. Enlightened, even, as another way to put it. And so you're kind of like reading this the first time through, you're like, oh, these guys, they were maybe just on the verge of discovering something, right? Like by going through that doorway, and then they're murdered. And then, oh, there's these colors, red and yellow, with squares and rhombuses nearby. Like, oh, in a paint factory, that must mean something. So even as like a fictional, a reader of fiction here, you start to want to look for that agency behind even like all these little signs that just so happen to connect all of these places. Only for Borges to give you the left punch of, yeah, I just set you up. I specifically made you see these patterns and look for a design behind it, only for you to realize I gave you that answer in like the opening pages.
Yeah. I don't know if this is a tangent or not, but I guess this is one of the reasons why I love reading so much, why I love books and whatnot over movies. I love movies, but movies, they almost force their thoughts and their views and their literal interpretations on you. Where a book, you are open to some interpretation. You get to imagine these things, and you still get to let the story unfold how you want, but it's much different than a visual aid of a movie and the pacing of a movie. You can stop and pause. You can reflect. You can read faster. You can go back and read. And it's a story like this that is allowing that information to unfold. And obviously there is a pacing to the book, the story, but Borges is doling it out to you. And you'd mentioned the Scharlachrock. I don't know how to say it either. But that literally means scarlet, right? In German. And that's a nod to.
And his first name is Red, so it's red.
Yeah. Which is a nod to, a Sherlock Holmes story or mystery or whatever. And so it's all these little things that you can pick up if you want to. It's almost like a choose your own adventure. And that's the great thing about a story like this.
Do you think that choose your own adventure, right? That kind of has these tones of determinism, that it doesn't matter, which one you pick, or even fatalism, I guess I should say, because you're going to end up at a specific endpoint, right? And they even mentioned specifically how Lone Rat had a penchant for gambling, and you'll notice that the way that he arrested Scarlax's brother, I think it was that it was like during like a gambling bust of sorts. If you go back to, because Borges has these themes throughout all of his writings, right? If you go back to the lottery in Babylon and such, right? The idea of when are we really in control of our fate? Like the idea of like this deterministic system as opposed to a chaotic system. And when does it matter what you do? Because you just end up at this location anyways, right? And here you have him kind of playing with that notion of like the idea that the fourth murder was going to happen, they say was never going to happen, right? But when we think about from a fate perspective, well, yeah, it did, right? Because the fourth murder was Lone Rat himself. Like he got murdered by Scarlac, right? That was like the final line, which had like this Buddhism feel of like the next time I kill you, which again is a very Borgesian thing, this labyrinth of repeating things where there's only like minute differences, perhaps from like a Hegelian dialect perspective each time. But even like the idea of him being like the fourth murder didn't happen, then there's fate that takes over. Like he took a chance at it, trying to gamble, but it doesn't change things, and it happened anyways.
Yeah, it almost reminds me of like Minority Report, like of that you can see the future, so it's inevitable. But for me, the Borges story almost has this duplicity. And to your point, you saying that we all get to the same ending. What if you don't finish it? What if you said, I don't want to know, and you didn't read the last paragraph or even the last sentence? Your view would be different. And, I think Borges would be okay with somebody saying, no, I'm not going to go down the path that you think I'm going to. I'm going to choose my own.
Well, and I can't bring up the story because it'd be a massive spoiler, but I think you know what story I want to bring up. But if you think about a circle, right, like it is, I mean, that is technically a line of sorts, maybe. I might be off my math terms here. But if you think about it, it's a single connection, start all the way around till the end. Like the pen never lifts up, and it's just one continuous motion. And you can even go around and around and around, and nothing changes.
Right.
Is the point of a circle, right? But if you take out one sentence, like you said, you don't read that last line. Or let's say the author, and this is going to give you a big hint as to what I'm thinking about, told you, hey, you may not want to continue, right? Like this could upset you, right? You take out a piece of that circle, it's no longer a circle. It's no longer continuous. It stops per se, right? And if we know something that never changes, it's time, right? The day starts and ends at the exact same minute, second, quote unquote, every single day. The year repeats itself ad nauseum for at least another million years until the sun blows up, right? But if you take out some of that story, it no longer works, right? And I like how Borges kind of plays with like that nauseating feeling of having to like relive and re-go through this thing over and over again.
I think that's the issue that, for me, Borges was trying to point out, that Monroe is that he is going in this circle and he doesn't see that a piece could be taken out. And that is his flaw. That for me was kind of the lesson that I took away from this is don't be stuck in that repetitive nature.
Don't be in your own mind labyrinth, right? There's always a labyrinth in every Borges story. The labyrinth in this one's his mind.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it.
So I don't know. Borges knocks another one out of the park. We're working our way through labyrinths as well as some of his more popular stories. Let us know what Borges stories you'd like to see us cover next. My name has been Una. Playlist of other Borges stories down below. Peace.
Peace.